So I'm Jack Stow, I'm a chiropractor. I've worked in Hemel Hempstead, Harpenden, St Albans currently, and I've met and managed to work with Louise a few times. So do you want to tell us what you do?
I'm Louise and I run Dacorum Community Dance, and we work predominantly with older people.
And so I met Louise actually as a patient, but we very quickly understood that there are many things that or certainly that I like to do with my patients that dance and movement is really helps with. So a lot of my focus with my patients is helping them move better. It's not always focusing so much on a pain or an exercise in itself. It's having them move more efficiently, with more balance and more strength and more poise, which is all things which is really synonymous with dance. And and Louise should understand that because you have ballet dance training background.
So my background is in ballet, but we run a lot of classes for older people who have mobility problems, but also active older people who just enjoy dance. And the more moving you do, the better.
Yeah, very true. And all of my patients, when they're coming in the door, instead of advising them again on just individual exercises, anytime I can encourage them towards a class or something that they enjoy, something that's social, something where there's support around them, and we know that patients are going to be more compliant and more likely to get on with that. So it really does tick a lot of boxes, and I think the work Louise does is brilliant. We've worked together a couple of times to talk through how some of my advice and some of the training that I've received can relate to some of the things that you do in your classes, in your workshops. We sometimes have a slightly different, we come from a slightly different background or approach. A lot of my advice comes from injury prevention and thinking about longevity of joints. And as much as I love martial arts and dance and movement-based activities, and I think they're very good for people, taking it right up to a professional level pushes the body to extremes and into places where they end up seeing people for injuries. So sometimes we describe certain activities and movements and classes maybe from a slightly different viewpoint. I think what we want to do today is workshop some things that anyone can do, just about anyone can do. We'll be talking some of the sort of foundation that I enjoy doing, but trying to realise that anyone, once they have that foundation, should be able to push and do a lot more, be more active, be more mobile. So, super. So first of all, we're going to talk a bit about balance. So balance is really vital to... We should explain what balance is that people talk about balance a lot, but it's a coordination of three systems. There's our eyesight, our vestibular system within the ears, and our proprioception, which is your joint positional sense. It's your sixth sense. So it's very important when we're doing balance training to use other visual cues, and the eyes and the ears are very, very good at compensating when people have problems, which inevitably we start to see at people's feet. So as a foundation for anyone that's coming in through my door, whether they have back pain, knee pain, hip pain, anything like that, or mobility issues, it's a really good place to start looking at the foot as the foundation. So I've done a number of fall prevention and knee and hip osteoarthritis management workshops and classes, and they're often with people who have a lot of movement problems and are not going to be people we're going to be doing very advanced exercises with. These are things that anyone should be able to do from even a seated position initially. So Louise today is going to be my patient to work with, and the first thing I like to point out is we want the foot to have better core support. There are core muscles within the feet that we don't often think about. And the way we ask people to do that is to engage small foot. So small foot is where we keep the whole of the foot flat on the floor. So I'd advise you to keep both feet flat on the floor at the moment. And then we're trying to shorten the length of the foot by drawing the ball towards the heel. Now, when I have patients that struggle with this, I will come in and form up to try and engage that. That's perfect. We know that Louise is firing the right muscles. We can see a long tendon that comes down the front that's pulling up on that arch. She's also doing well because she's not lifting the ball off of the floor. And the next thing is that, and you can probably show this, when people try to shorten the length of the foot, often they will claw the toes. And here we see the ball lifting off the floor and toes clawing. So we're trying to achieve this position and not this clawed position, okay? So keep the heel where it is, keep all of the foot flat and in contact with the floor, shorten the ball towards the heel, okay? And then, whilst holding that position, try and wiggle your toes and let them relax. And that's the tricky thing, because when you first start to do this, if you have a problem with your balance, or if you've been struggling for a while, the toes are always going to want to grip and claw into the floor. Some people might not have that much of a sense of what their foot is doing, even if they're in the right position. Again, when we come in and form and help them mould that, they're going to get more sense of what's going on. But the next thing I encourage people to do is to put some weight down through the foot in a small foot position. What Louise will feel more of now is those tendons and ligaments and muscles straining under and wanting to collapse. So if you could actually show what happens when you don't hold the small foot and even let it collapse, we basically don't want the foot pronating, flattening in, rolling in and squashing out and elongating, okay? So we start, I'll often have feet together, shortening the length of the foot. Then we're going to start putting some weight down through the knees, exactly like that. And again, always just checking that the ball is staying in contact with the floor. We can see the tendons firing, which will help pulling the foot up and in, and that's perfect. The next tricky part is to be able to stand up out of the seat, okay, and engage a small foot. So if you do that for me now. Now, Louise doesn't have too much of an issue with this at all, but when you suddenly have the whole weight of your body back on your feet, quite often those arches will want to splay back out, and some people will struggle with this. So if that's the case, if once you're standing upright, you're struggling to achieve small foot, you can always go back to seated position. You can go back to engaging it, pressing down through the knees, or you can even use a tea towel on the floor that you try to drag towards you by only using that small action of shortening the foot, just to get used to it. So the reason why we're so interested in small foot and giving this core posture is that position in the foot acts as a spring, and springs conserve energy. So for movement, for what dancers are so good at, and for what Mo Farah is so good at when he runs, is he's not having a lot of flat-footed, hard impact, which is vibrating through all of his joints, causing more wear and tear, and having muscles react and guard to it. He's getting a nice, soft, springy cushion, and then the next step off and the next bit of movement, and of course with ballet dancers, we see them very light on their feet, is how they can conserve energy that we're interested in. So having that arch, engaging that arch before we look to do more dynamic movement is very, very helpful. If they are flat and pronated out and splayed out, some of the stabilizers and muscles, which we're going to look at in a moment when we're looking at balance exercises, are already at a stretch. And I describe that as often that a muscle at a stretch, it's really hard to get it to work and it's uncomfortable. When it's in a more short and comfortable position, it feels stronger, it feels much more stable. So we don't want a lot of these stabilizing muscles around the feet and ankles to be overstretched before we even start with any movement exercises. Okay? So that is our small foot exercise. This is small foot in a weight-bearing position. Now the next thing is, and I'm sure Louise does this at the beginning of a lot of her classes, is how you find your centre. How do you describe that with your...
So we would start probably with the feet slightly apart, and we would just find the weight forwards in the feet, so not hanging back on the heels. We talk about the muscles in the legs being active but not locking the knees. Hips facing forward, shoulders forwards, relaxed and open, and then the head nicely on top without any tension in the neck.
with my patients, I'll often describe, certainly I don't like them locking the knees out. A lot of people do that when they're trying to stand up straight. I sometimes like them to imagine that they're about to be pushed, or that there is an earthquake around, and that they want to, because when we do that, we usually sit down a little bit. We arch a little bit in all of our joints, okay? And so anyway, they're just different ways of describing, often really achieving the same thing. The next part of moving into balance exercises is actually to feel for the 3 balance points in a foot. So in this case, I'm actually going to ask Louise to take a seat, and if you're happy, we'll get you to raise one foot up for me. So in the foot, the balance point should really be heel, ball of the foot, and the tricky one is the base of the 4th toe. Okay? So we can think of those as 3 points. So what I ask patients to do, if we get you up again, is once you've found that soft, comfortable, relaxed position through your joints, is to play with the balance points in the feet. And a simple way of doing that is leaning forwards, leaning backwards, leaning to one side. And when we're doing that, I'm trying to have my patients feel for, can they feel the weight shifting onto the ball and the base of the 4th toe, being the tricky one, or rocking back onto the heel? When we go from side to side, we're going to go to the outside of one foot and the inside of the other. And once they've had a play and a feel with that, whilst engaging small foot, again the trick, and wiggling the toes to let them relax, I want them to be able to equally weight all 3 points in both feet with the same amount of weight. So most people again will struggle with the base of the 4th toe. For some, it will involve opening out the knees a little to turn the weight a little more onto the outside of the feet. So we've got 3 points of balance, okay? And this is the real static stance position that I have people not just adopt in their feet, but then get to feel and sense. And the reason why we do that becomes very important once we look at more movement and some of the strength exercises where we're going to progress to. So we will talk about why those 3 points of balance are important, okay? So once we've found those positions and we've had a play with some of the sort of balance and movement exercises, I'm sure there's things that you do in your class which are around some of these movements. Yeah. But I like to test and see when patients, if they have a problem with their balance. And the simple way we do that is a single leg balance exercise. So what we've already done is set you up with some really good foundation for this balance exercise. So it's going to be harder for you, not harder, it should be easier for you, and you should be failing these exercises if you've understood about 3 points of balance and engaging the small foot position. So for single leg balance, I'm going to encourage anyone, particularly if you have a problem with your balance, to perhaps use a corner of a room, or have a table right in front of you, or be stood just immediately behind a chair. So if you think at any time you're going to have a wobble or fall, you've immediately got things around you, so it's nice and safe and stable. For a lot of people, if you just have a chair, you should be able to use that straight away. So single leg balance. Again, if I ask you to adopt small foot, if I ask you to find 3 points of balance in both feet, I'm then going to ask you to shift your body weight, and you've got to try and shift that centre of gravity over to one foot, whichever foot you feel more comfortable going towards, okay? Once you've done that, and you still feel you've got 3 points of balance equally, I want you to find a fixed point to look at ahead of you. Because I said balance is a coordination of proprioception in the feet, the vestibular system in the ear, and our eyesight. So Louise is going to find a fixed point dead ahead of her to concentrate on as she lifts one foot off the floor. Okay? So if people have got a problem with their balance, I'm going to be expecting to see a lot of wobbling around the ankle and muscles really making big adjustments to correct for the wobbles that they're feeling. We have a fail if people touch a foot down or touch their legs together or have a major wobble that they then have to correct. Louise's fantastic balance, so we're not seeing any of these things, and she can put her foot down. I'm always trying to encourage people to at least be able to get up to about 15 seconds. But I'm sure you'll know with a lot of people you work with, even a few seconds on one foot is going to be tricky. The best thing about balance training is that we're not looking to build up muscular strength. I'm not looking to build up with lots of exercises. What instead we're actually working on is the nervous system, and the nervous system is plastic and pliable. It will change quickly.
Yeah.
So you'll see improvements in dancers and people that come to your classes when they're not even really thinking about it, just because they're going through those movements and they're getting used to feeling it. But I like coordinating some of these exercises with a few little cues and tips, like using a centering point to look at. We said 15 seconds is where we'd like people to get to. I expect people to be able to train up to about 30 seconds, and if we're really doing well, it's at least a minute on one leg. Every time there's a major wobble, stop, reset, maybe relax your feet and legs, re-engage small foot, find the 3 points of balance, and weight bear all over again. Okay? So these are really quite static foundation exercises. I progress all of my exercises. We start off on going through heel raises, which are much more dynamic positions. They're things that are very important for people who want to do anything with agility and changes of direction. They involve mechanisms in the hind foot. They're things that dancers and practicing dance is going to be engaging anyway. So again, I much prefer people to be going to a class, a movement class, where they have to do this as a matter of course. And I'm sure even in some of your exercises you're already doing some of these things.
Yes, yeah, so like, you know, if we were doing a bit of ballet for our warm-up, we'd probably be doing knee bends and then rises, maybe in a turned out position or a parallel position.
Yeah.
But also just in any step as well that we might be doing, people will be going needing to balance in between, but not really thinking about it, just doing it.
And the fact that you do them turned out and straight ahead, I'm always going to be showing my patients when they're getting up out of a chair and hip hinging and movements that help look after the back. I'm more forward facing. Yeah. But actually turning the feet out is a mechanism that makes people feel a bit more stable. There are some people who will naturally be in those positions. And the fact is with dance and other movement activities is that we're still working through those balance movements and coordinating those exercises in different positions. So you've actually got adaptability and flexibility to be in different positions, which is, you know, really good and really important.
That turned out position isn't forced. It would be about 10 to 2 if you were hands on the clock. Yeah. So there's no sort of pressure on the knees or the hips.
Perfect. So as much as I'd like to show some of the other progressions of different exercises, they are things that won't be appropriate for everyone, and not everyone can easily get up onto tiptoes stably and comfortably. So what we thought we'd do instead is work on some of the other strength-based and larger movements of knees and hips. And again, these are some of the things where hopefully there's going to be some crossover from the classes that you're doing. So we might even want to start by just thinking about sitting again, and I might do this a bit more sideways on so they can see. So for a little bit of sitting posture, I'm always encouraging people to sit the backside as far back in the horizontal seat as they can possibly go. I love the notion that it is synonymous with dance and in other movement-based exercises where you pull yourself long and tall. Yeah. Okay, which is a string coming out through the top of the head and pulling up. It's not arching back and extending, which is not very comfortable. So I like people being long and tall, and then tilting back ever so slightly. This is a really good, comfortable sitting position I'm encouraging anyone with a bad back to do. It isn't the position I want people to adopt when they go to get up out of a chair, though. So I want them to be a lot more dynamic, a lot more thinking about the movement that's coming ahead. So getting up out of a chair and really focusing on hip hinging is vital vital to my practice, because over a lifetime we see that people tend to overuse knees and wear them out. They have a lot of dominance in the stronger quadriceps, thigh muscles, and they don't tend to move the hips so much. They don't tend to have as much strength in around the backside, and they tend to focally wear the hip joint in the same kind of 20 degrees of movement day in, day out, while the knees is almost doing 70 or a lot more. So I have a big approach for the vast majority of my patients to try and encourage more hip hinging and more dynamic stances and movement, and to stress the knees less. And so particularly for my senior patients, that's what I'm often seeing is stiff joints, but maybe weak joints also. So this is a simple movement that everyone does. It's a squat. It's getting up out of any chair. It's something people do 100 times a day, and I'd rather people doing this very well and just moving better than actually give you a whole exercise. So I'm going to ask Louise to come forward in the seat, shuffling right forwards. And then at the moment, Louise's gravity line is going to be coming right down through her backside on sitting bones. And if she's going to get up out of the chair, we need her to get that gravity line over the feet. So I'm also going to encourage her to bring the feet back a little bit to make that easier. She's got a long, tall spine again, string coming out the top of the spine. I then want her to be able to tilt forwards, and it's really from the hip joint. If you could demonstrate, I don't want you to be moving from your shoulders. I don't want her to be reaching for her knees. A lot of people with bad backs are going to do that. They'll feel they need the support. The problem with that is that you won't be engaging backside muscles and things that are going to actually stabilize your back. So it's long and tall, we're relaxed, we're tilting forwards, but we're trying to get quite a dynamic position. It's the position that an Olympic ski jumper would have, okay, at the top of the ramp, okay? This is launch position, okay? And it will feel tight in the back. It will feel tight around the back of the hip and buttocks. That's normal. I'm happy with that. In this launch position, this is where I'm going to ask patients to then drive the hips up through and forwards, driving the hips and squeezing from the buttocks. And if you don't feel anything in the back of the hip and buttocks, you're not using them. And if you're not using them, it's going to get even harder over a lifetime to be able to get up and down easily, and to be able to lunge in any position and use stairs or do the dance classes or any of those things, okay? Sitting down equally, I like to think of it as people sitting the hips back. So initiating movements from the hips and not too much from the knees. We definitely don't want the knees going past the toes in those positions. Perfect. And if she's doing that, you're more likely to make it to the back of the seat. Okay? So I have to cover this with all of my patients when to try and manage any low back complaint, and to spare knees, and to strengthen hips that are otherwise going to stiffen and weaken. I don't know the sorts of things that you do in any of your classes, and how many problems you see with people in around hips and glutes, and what sort of movements you might do. Yeah,
I mean, we mostly have women in the classes, and so hips can be an issue. Some people have had hip replacements. Some of the CT classes I do, people have had hip replacements as well. So yeah, there's a variety of stuff that we would do, but sitting down into chairs is not one of them actually.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand. It is quite basic, but it's an important bit of foundation that we can then break down and apply in other ways.
And I think also thinking about the muscles in the legs, because we've got such big muscle groups in the legs, and using those rather than the back, that's a key thing.
Also, I'm often using imagery when I'm talking to my patients, and I'm encouraging them, people be in a lot of pain, a lot of fear of movement. When Louise and I have spoken in the past, there's so much about the intention of movement, which you come across in dance all the time, and the sort of role playing that people in your class will do. It is actually important to really encourage and get people moving who would otherwise be quite stiff and static and fearful of movement. So again, when I'm saying, Louise, can you come forwards in the seat, I want my patients to be more dynamic in their positioning, to imagine they're the Olympic ski jumper. Because otherwise I see people sort of shuffle forwards and they're acting like they've got a problem. Yeah. So we want them, you know, being more positive than that, more active than that. And it's another reason that movement, just in movement classes, dance classes, Tai Chi and other types of movement classes, give people body confidence and movement confidence that they otherwise you might not have. So you're going to show me, we're going to put it all together, we're going to shuffle forwards in the seat, feet back slightly, you're going to tilt forwards, get the weight over the feet. When you feel it over the feet, I want your hips to drive up through and forwards. Perfect, from there. But now we're going to show, this is very static, sitting up and down out of the chair, a little bit more of the other type of movements that we do when we're on our feet, which is any lunge position. So one leg up, one leg down techniques, I like to describe them as. So I said earlier that people tend to use too much at the knee and not enough at the hips. You also said you have a lot of women in your class.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've already almost laboured on about the balance points in the feet, particularly the base of the fourth toe. The reason I like to talk about that a lot is once we have people being more dynamic in doing other movements, and this can be anything from climbing stairs and reaching in and out of low cupboards or doing any other form of movement, we're going into a one leg forward, one leg back, or a one leg up and a one leg down position. And with women, they have a wider carrying angle of their hip. The childbearing hips are wider than the men's hip joints. And because of that, there is more work that's needed by the lateral stabilizers of the hips. So I have a lot of people come in who have an issue and a problem with their movement that where we often see this wobbling to the side of the hip, getting up and down from the floor. And we see that when there isn't enough strength and engagement in muscles that keep the weight of the body over the hip, over the knee, and over the foot. Okay? So when we were talking earlier about finding a balance point and finding an equal amount of weight both on the inside and outside of the feet, and the outside being the base of the fourth toe, if I ask Louise to sit down in a squat position or to step forward in a lunge position, if she concentrates on her balance as she's doing it and where weight is going through the foot, it's far more likely she will be engaging lateral stabilizers of her hips without even thinking about it. That if she isn't balanced, if she has a problem with her balance, if she's not aware of where she's loading through her feet, these might not be firing. And when they're not firing, movements start to, well, bad habits kick in before we're even aware. Louise's dance training sets her up for very, very good technique and technique over a lifetime. I'm still really keen to get children and you know, aware of some of these movements, and I'm very pleased when children are going to dance classes or doing martial arts or any of those activities, because it ingrains all these good habits. But over a lifetime, we get lazy and we start to see these problems. So outside of that, my tips are based around one leg up, one leg down tricks. Okay, and we're going to get Louise to demonstrate some of these. Okay, so the first tip is, if you were going to, and we can go sideways on for a moment, if you were going to wash your face over a sink and you had a bad back, show me washing your face over a sink. Well, just have a feel. So if we freeze frame, she's likely to have quite a tight back and hamstrings pulling on her back at the moment. It's unlikely in the middle of the night or first thing in the morning, if you're feeling stiff, that you're going to have perfect squat technique as you wash your face. So I don't encourage my patients to move like this all the time. The way I want my patients moving through the day is like a dancer. I want them moving more elegantly and more gracefully. And we do that more dynamically with one leg up, one leg down tricks. So I often encourage patients to approach a sink or a worktop or the boot of the car, whatever it may be, obliquely at an angle. And the reason for that, I'll demonstrate this here, is when I'm face on and square on and working over something, my knees are going to look at the same height, yeah? And as I was describing before, I've got both hamstrings pulling on my backside and my back. They may not be very flexible, as a lot of people are not very flexible. It's actually a good injury risk. Whereas if I change my stance to 45 degrees, I've immediately got one leg up and one leg down. But this is where I'm sure Louise will have seen in some of her classes, people who don't have confidence with their balance and with their movement often look very static and stuck to the floor and don't want to initiate movement. They might have pain or not have, again, the confidence to move. What Louise is beautifully demonstrating now is that when she shifts her position, she's shifting her weight over her forward leg. And we know that because the heel's off the floor. So I know her balance point has shifted and changed. Now from this position, which is a more dynamic position, it's like being on the start line of a race. So show me start line of a race. And now she's dipping it. And where did she dip from? She dipped at the hip. The knee did not go past the toe. There's no more stress at the knee. If your knee goes past your toe, it's 10 to 14 times more force over the kneecap. It will wear it out over a lifetime. So what she's doing is more hip hinging. There's more balance over this forward leg. And it's actually easier in this position to bend down to wash your face. So I like people getting nice and close to objects, or sometimes using a short step. I'll have people do that, which does the same thing, one leg up, one leg down. It encourages more hip hinging on one side. But in this instance, you don't always have to have a step in front of you. You can just approach the object obliquely. You can come at right angles to it, so at 45 degrees to it. Okay, and I like people coming right up close to it and then reverse lunging, okay, which is gliding that leg back to get them down. It's what I do day in, day out with patients that I'm working over, who may weigh a lot more than I do, and I have to twist and rotate around them. I want the big joints, the glutes and the hips doing all the work. I don't want the little joints in the back having to do all of that. So these are the basics that I'm assessing in patients, but they're things that athletes and dancers, you can observe day in and day out. Athletes don't bend the knees and keep a straight back on a skateboard, a surfboard. They move from the hips. We see it in golf, we see it in Olympic powerlifting, that there's much more movement at the hips and less at the knees. Yeah. So there's a few more one leg up, one leg down tricks that we use. We started just showing that any dynamic stance of shifting weight from one leg to another adopts those positions, wakes up the core muscles more than being planted with both feet will do. For the more balletic and the people who feel a little bit more able, there's a great position that people will use all the time, even with a bad back, called the golfer's lift. Okay? So I just encourage anyone to do this so long as they've got something to touch upon. And that could be the wall, chair, table, anything like that. And the simple point is, if we adopt that stance of upper body tilting forward as the lower body, or the lower leg tilts backwards, and unhinge the knee a little bit, it's what we call the golfer's lift. It's where people pick the ball out of the hole. So all the movement really is coming from the hip joint. There's very little coming from the back. The back is doing its stabilising role. It's doing what it should do. The knee, if you show me again, only has to do a bit of bending at the last moment. So there's a lot of movement and strength and mobility encouraged at the hip. I know it looks quite balletic and that it looks quite advanced, but even when I have people come in with quite a bad disc injury, I can, with confidence, show them that they can do this position for small objects, socks and keys that they have to pick up off the floor, and it's still quite safe, at least for the back, okay, as long as there's something to touch upon. What I don't want to see is people flexing the back and bringing the leg up as an afterthought. So when I show people and describe it, it's very much as my upper body's tilting forwards, I've got the counterweight of my trailing leg the whole time. Okay, so that's called the golfer's lift. It's quite balletic, but it's a really good, simple one that encourages so much more movement from the hip. And then,
I'll put that in my class.
Yeah, you can put that in your class. Perfect. Also, there's we did start touching upon just a lunge, a forward lunge.
Yeah.
I still prefer, and when I start with patients who have a knee pain or a back pain, I normally give them a reverse lunge. So in your movement classes and dance classes, you're often going to be coming forwards. We always have an issue of knees going past the toe. And there are some people without good balance, with lateral wobbles, which aren't being picked up on, and it is easier if we again have a bit of small foot, 3 points of balance, weight over the forward leg, or at least shift the weight over that forward leg. The moment that Louise's forward foot is weighted upon, her trailing leg is unweighted. And that allows her to be able to stroke, glide the foot backwards. And she can come all the way down if she needs to that position. So getting up from this position is not so easy. We're going to cover that in just a moment. We have to be able to get our weight back over the foot and really drive up through and forwards. It's very dynamic and it does involve a lot of effort. So we'll show you this now. There will be some people that won't want to do that all the way down to the floor, but I'll show you some of the ways, some of the other tips and tricks that you can use to get up. But what's important in how I describe this to patients is how they approach whatever they're trying to pick up. So if I was to use my phone as an example, and we have to get it up off the floor, most people lunge forward. That's a sort of freeze frame at this point. Then the knee continues to do a lot of the bending, and then they flex their spine to pick up the object. That could be to do up laces. It's frequently what we'll see working in a flower bed down on the floor, which a lot of people will do. The knee is massively overflexed. It's a long way away from the gravity line. So as I get up from this position and push my knee backwards, if you could hear there'd be creaking, clunking, it's a lot of forces. And the whole time I'm doing very little with the glute. Okay, the backside is not doing it enough. To change that around, we have to approach the object we're trying to work on differently. So I like people to step alongside or almost past whatever it is they're trying to work it over. Shift their weight onto that leg. If it's shifted, they can glide the leg back in a reverse lunge. So the knee has not gone past the toe, and the object is as close as it's going to be underneath me in a gravity line. It's straight underneath me. I'm not flexing, twisting, and reaching for it. So I always encourage people in the garden to actually work on one leg if they can, and to approach the flower bed, to approach that obliquely, one leg forward, one leg back, if they need to. They may have to switch positions from side to side. What I don't want them doing so much of is being on both knees and flexing down. It's something that people can do, and certainly in dance and in other sports we want people to be, we don't want to say you can't do this and we can't bend and you're going to give yourself an injury if you flex your back. We want people to have the ability to be able to adapt and to be able to move like that, but it certainly increases your risk and your chances of doing those things. And if you've been in the garden all day and things are tightening, fatiguing, it's a problem. So one leg up, one leg down techniques again, from a reverse lunge position. Not lunging down towards it, but getting your weight over it and stepping back. Really, really good, safe, balanced ways of moving around. But getting up from this position is very difficult. So there are a lot of people that won't have the strength or flexibility to be able to get all of their body weight. Louise's gravity line, again, it's going down through her left knee. But because her left leg and hip are straight, she can't engage her glute to get her up off the floor. Okay? If you try and get up using both legs at the same time from this position, if you try that for me, she won't actually be as stable, okay, because her weight is on both feet and she can't move from one to another. Right now you're stuck. Both feet are weighted, so you can't bring them together. Okay, so if you sit back down, apologies for that. And it's why, as much as we would think using both legs might be more stable to move, I'm now stuck in no man's land and I'm not very stable. And it's not how we see athletes and dancers move. So instead, this is very much like the sprinter on the starting blocks. Gravity line's currently going down through the knee. You need to get your centre of gravity, your sternum, over the forward foot. So it's a huge amount of stress and effort at the moment at her right hip. But from there, you're trying to drive your hip up through and forwards. Perfect. And we know that that trailing foot was unweighted because the heel was up off the ground. Okay? That takes a lot of strength, it takes confidence. It's something that I build up to with patients, but you're always going to be closer to getting there and doing it if you're getting used to
all those other things.
One leg up, one leg down, hip hinging.
And the up from the chair.
Exactly. And having the sort of confidence to get there. So there's some of the things that I talk about for strength and for mobility and for looking after backs, looking after knees and hips over a lifetime. There's lots of ways we progress. I do core exercises, which is always very important. But they're still fundamentally things where wherever I can encourage people, it's to say be more dynamic with your movement. Think like you're on the start line of the race. Look like the speed skater instead of just doing it lazily. More people sprain and strain their backs picking up a pencil or going for their phone than lifting a heavy sofa. When we lift a heavy sofa, we think about bracing and engaging and supporting ourselves. It's easy falling into bad habits and doing something lazily and then thinking, wow, it really hurts. So that's what fills my clinic day in and day out, those type of people. I don't see ballet dancers, I don't see people who use balance a lot of the time, which again are surfers and skateboarders. We don't see them in the clinic unless they fall off and hurt themselves,
And I think it's good to say that it's never too late, because I know that building up good technique is great for kids and for children doing ballet and dance, but at any age that you can come to dance, you can start to adopt that technique and start to think more about your body, and all of those things that you've been discussing about points of balance, your feet, using your feet. And I've got bare feet now, so in my class I would encourage dancing in bare feet and being at home without shoes as much as possible.
Neurologically, there's very good reasons for doing that. And in balance training, I missed the point earlier, you are barefooted. We want balance training ideally to be done in a bare foot. So easiest times to do it would be brushing teeth. You're not going anywhere. In the shower, particularly when a lot of people are in an enclosed space, that it's harder to fall, hopefully. Using those cues are easy places to do it.
I would say waiting for the kettle to boil in the kitchen.
Waiting for the kettle to boil?
Knee bends,
perfect.
knee rises.
Yeah. Finding little cues like that instead of making it a homework, instead of making it an exercise, and moving better from day to day. It's still really important. And Louise is very right. I love seeing and getting people in young and looking at technique and encouraging better movement and strength. But we have patients, into their 90s and above, who I'm still going to be describing these same techniques and still trying to achieve some of these same movements. but I'd much rather that they're not fearful and in pain. I'd much rather that they already have some community around them. So whenever we've ended up speaking, I'm always so happy that what Louise does is go in and often work with people who might be a little bit more isolated or less mobile. Some of her, certainly in your dance class, you have some very active, very, very capable people, but there will be other people in your sitting classes that you do a lot of work with. And I think Louise has some brilliant techniques and some brilliant tricks almost up her sleeve, which give people confidence and make it fun and not make it into a class. Because a lot of what I'm talking about today is it's very regimented, so everything that Louise is doing are all the things that I would encourage any patient that walks in through the door. If they can find a movement class in ballet, in dance, in tai chi, in acting, in role play, in any of those things.
And even seated, if mobility isn't great, there's still such a lot you can do from your chair. So
it's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Anyway, so it's been a pleasure showing you some of the things that we talk about today. Again, I'm currently based with Head and Short podiatrists in St Albans High Streets and Harpenden High Street. I will post some links to some of the information that we've covered today, some of the balance exercises, hip hinging, one leg up, one leg down techniques, so we can go through all of those things, and you should be able to find that. And also like to remind what Louise is doing, where you can find Louise.
So we have lots of classes. Hopefully we'll post our email address, and we have a website, dacorumcommunitydance.co.uk, and find out about our classes there. And we do standing classes for more active people, and we also do seated classes. I'm currently working online on Zoom, so there's always an opportunity to dance with us. Yes,
Super.
Even in the morning we're doing a great project called Wake Up and Dance. You can join us at 9 o'clock for 10 minutes to have a boogie in your lounge or your kitchen every day of the week.
Brilliant. Super. Thanks so much.